Hi, and welcome back to our last course in this program, where I want to focus our attention on the ways in which you can master outcome-centric selling and put the principles into practice. But before I do, I want to share a quick reality check with you. And without regular application and implementation, most of the concepts taught in any training course, including this one, no matter how relevant they are, tend to be forgotten or abandoned within a few weeks if they're not properly reinforced. So the potential value can only be fully achieved through consistent day-to-day usage, through that regular reinforcement, and wherever possible, with the enthusiastic and unconditional support of sales management. Now, if you haven't already done so, I think you'll find it useful to download and read our guide to mastering outcome-centric selling. It really lays out some of the principles in what I hope you'll see is a pretty effective way. So please do that. Please download it and read it. Now, a quick reminder of what we've covered in this program so far. We've tried to address the mindset, the skills, and the competencies needed to succeed as a modern B2B sales professional, from establishing the foundations, to planning to win, to proactive targeting, to qualifying and forecasting, to value creating conversation frameworks and skills, to stakeholder management, and of course to coming up with customer specific value propositions. These are key building blocks that reflect the realities of today's complex B2B sales environments, and they're designed to equip, enable, and encourage you to put yourself in the customer's shoes and to focus on understanding and influencing and achieving your customers' desired business outcomes. And the approach is designed to enable you to win by putting your customers' interests first. So let's briefly summarize some of the key elements that we've covered so far in the program. And let's start with the importance of outcomes. What is involved? Well, it involves systematically understanding, influencing, and addressing outcomes at both the organizational and the personal level, and making sure those desired outcomes are actually achieved by your customer in practice. It involves going beyond uncovering already recognized obvious needs, and it adds the idea of opening up your customer's eyes to previously unexplored or unrecognized possibilities. And it involves understanding whether your prospects embarked on an inevitable or a discretionary purchase, and whether they're engaged in a familiar or an unfamiliar buying journey, and armed with that understanding, consciously and thoughtfully adapting your sales strategy accordingly. So why is it so important, and why am I focusing on outcomes and not on solution selling? Well, there's a home truth here. At the end of the day, the only ones entitled to call anything a solution are not vendors or salespeople. They're the people or organizations that had the problem in the first place and saw it addressed. Now, today's business customers are far less interested in what you choose to label your so-called solutions than they are in achieving their desired business outcomes. That's why we've chosen to focus on outcomes. And then we turned our attention to planning to win. And we referred to some of the research done by Neil Rackham, the author of Spin Selling and a number of other best-selling sales books. And after decades of research, Rackham concluded that good selling depends more on good planning than on any other factor. And so we introduced a number of key types of plan. A simple territory plan template to help you to maximize the revenue potential of your assigned territory. A one-page account plan to help you to focus on the things that will really make a difference when it comes to maximizing lifetime customer value. We introduced opportunity plans and checklists to help you maximize your chances of winning every opportunity that you compete in. And we introduced the concept of mutual success plans. And these are designed to maximize the chance that your customers will achieve or exceed their expected outcomes by doing business with you. And of course, there was another type of plan, the value creating conversation framework plan, and that's designed to help you prepare to make every conversation count. So why is planning to win so important? Well, I think if you look around, you'd recognize that many of today's top sales performers are in that position because they recognize the value of investing in planning and preparation. And of course, the act of planning prepares you to deal with the unexpected as well as with the expected and predictable. And of course, failing to plan really amounts to straightforwardly planning to fail. And then we turned our attention to proactive targeting, the key considerations when it comes to targeting and prioritizing and engaging your most valuable potential customers. And we suggested that there are four key things you really need to understand. And the first one is, so what are the most common, actionable, high impact business issues in your marketplace that your organization has a proven track record of successfully addressing? And having understood that, then we need to turn our attention to, so what are the common characteristics of your most valuable potential customers, i.e., your ideal customer profiles who are likely to be suffering from those issues and to want to do something about it? And then we turned our attention to the key roles within those organizations who are most likely to be responsible for addressing the issues for their company. And then finally, we recognize the importance of tracking and monitoring the catalysts and trigger events that are most likely to cause your prospect to recognize that they need to take urgent action. So why is proactive targeting so important? You know, today's top sales performers always have a clear sense of what their most valuable prospects look like. And you can't afford to waste any sales energy trying to pursue prospects who either don't need what you offer or would be unlikely to buy it from you. So that's why these four considerations are such a critical part of successful proactive targeting and prospecting. And then we turned our attention to qualifying and forecasting. And I hope I managed to persuade you that BANT is a very inadequate way of qualifying sales opportunities in today's climate, that MEDDIC represents an improvement, but that we believe that our extended and updated MEDPIC Plus framework is even more effective. So if you remember, the 10 key MEDPIC Plus qualification factors include ICP fit, metrics, economic buyers, decision criteria, decision process, paper or approval process, issues and implications, champions, competitive alternatives, and last but by no means least, close date confidence. And why is qualifying and forecasting so important? Well, you know, if you can't qualify effectively, you will inevitably end up pursuing deals you cannot win, and you might even end up abandoning or avoiding deals that you could have won. If you cannot qualify effectively, if you can't do it consistently, you'll never be able to accurately value your pipeline or come up with an appropriate forecast for the revenue that you expect to generate. And then we introduced the idea of the value creating conversation framework. And our goal here is to help to ensure that every significant conversation has the best possible chance of not just advancing your sales process, but also the customer's buying decision journey. And you might remember that we identified 5 key elements of that value creating conversation framework. And the first layer was preparing the ground, doing your research, etc., prior to the conversation. And then we really focus down on the important first few minutes when you're setting the scene at the start of the conversation. And we introduce the concept of agreeing a provisional next step in that setting of the scene and not waiting until the final few minutes of a conversation to anticipate what the next steps might be. We introduce the key pillars that support the core of the conversation: teaching, learning, sharing, and anticipating. And we gave you a framework for agreeing the conclusions at the end of the conversation in ways that ensured that the next steps were clear, actionable, clearly owned, and timely. And then finally, we reminded you of the importance of analyzing the outcomes after the conversation and learning from them. So, why is this framework approach so important? You know, to stand any chance of success, every conversation must have the goal of creating meaningful value for every participant. And without some sort of preparation and planning, you're very unlikely to achieve that. And that's why it's so important to set the scene at the start of the conversation, including making sure there's complete agreement and alignment around the agenda, the objectives, and the provisional next step. And then we complemented that framework by introducing a number of value creating conversational skills. And these key conversational skills included making sure that every participant is given the chance to contribute. It included intelligently combining and using the 5 key spin cycle question types: situation questions, problem questions, implication questions, need value questions, and commitment questions. It stressed the importance of how to go about establishing a provisional next step after setting the scene, and we gave you a structure for that. We encouraged you to recognize the importance of educating your customer by sharing relevant anecdotes, insights, and evidence. And we encouraged you to anticipate those frequently asked and sometimes tough to answer questions, and of finding ways to confidently deal with objections, with concerns, and clarifications. So, why are these skills so important? Well, because successful sales conversations are intensively interactive. They're not uninterrupted monologues. And what you say and how you choose to say it has a huge influence on the outcome of the conversation. And one of the key elements, of course, of a successful conversation is that you establish consciously and thoughtfully a give get balance in which every participant feels they've both contributed and learned from the conversation. And then we turned our attention to stakeholder management. And the reason why that's so important is that today's buying decision and approval processes often involve large numbers of influential stakeholders. And many of those stakeholders are going to have different perspectives, roles, influence, attitudes, and level of accessibility. So the things you need to understand about each stakeholder include their primary perspective. How do they look at the world? How do they process information? What's their role in the decision making and the approval processes? What's their influence over the decision and approval processes? What's their attitude towards the project or the issue? And what's their attitude towards us and our company and our proposed solution? How easy is it to access them and to continue to access them? And what's the single most important issue in the context of this project that they want to address? And very much related to that, so what's the single most important way in which we create value for each of these key stakeholders? So why is stakeholder management so important? Well, there's a clear need to identify, engage, assess, and wherever possible influence every significant stakeholder, including the ones who might at first not be visible to you. But the more you know about each stakeholder, the better your chances of securing their support or of neutralizing any negative attitudes. That's why stakeholder management is so important. And then we sort of pulled together the threads by introducing customer specific value propositions. I put the case to you that your chance of winning their business in a timely manner are dramatically enhanced if you've been developing a carefully crafted customer specific value proposition that you've verified with all the key stakeholders before you present your proposal. And the real heart of this is understanding that every customer facing a significant buying decision is asking themselves four key questions, even if they don't present those questions in quite that way to you. And they're asking themselves, so why do we need to act rather than continuing on our current path? They're asking, why do we need to act now rather than later? Where's the urgency? They're asking themselves, why should they choose us rather than any other option? And they're asking themselves, particularly if we're a relatively unknown quantity to them, why should they trust us to ensure that they actually achieved their desired business outcomes? And why is this concept of customer specific value proposition so important? Well, if the answers to any of these four questions are unclear or weak, then your customer's likely to defer their decision or just to do nothing. And so proposals that have positive, pre-verified answers to all four questions are far more likely to be approved and implemented by your customer. So how can you get the most out of outcome-centric selling? How can salespeople and sales managers together contribute to getting the most out of these thoughts on a consistent, on a repeatable and sustained basis? Well, I would say if you're a salesperson, the real foundation upon which you've got to build is to be honest with yourself and with others. And of course, in return, sales managers need to do everything they can to establish and encourage and reinforce a culture of honest communication. If you're a salesperson, please be open to feedback, seek it out, welcome it. And if you're a sales manager, complement that by making sure that you are giving regular constructive feedback. If you're a salesperson, please look for evidence. Please eliminate sources of hope or assumption. The evidence is what's important. And if you're a sales manager, please challenge your salespeople's assumptions. Insist that they have the evidence to back up their assertions. If you're a salesperson, please be optimistic in your actions whilst being conservative in your predictions. And as a sales manager, please encourage positive thinking, but also don't be afraid to challenge unjustified overconfidence. And if you're a salesperson and you may have had experience of other somewhat rigid sales training programs or methodologies, I urge you to think of outcome-centric selling and the approach that underpins it as a flexible guide and not as a rigid straitjacket. And again, if you're a sales manager, please encourage your salespeople to thoughtfully apply the principles that underpin outcome-centric selling. And if you're a salesperson, please use the outcome-centric selling tools on a day-to-day basis. And if you're a sales manager, please encourage and expect your salespeople to do exactly that. If you're a salesperson, please, and this is part of the self-honesty, acknowledge what you don't know or you aren't sure of, and resolve to yourself that you're going to find out. And if you're a sales manager, then you can complement that by helping your salespeople to recognize what they don't know or what they aren't sure of, and encouraging and equipping them to find out. If you're a salesperson, finally, please make a commitment to your own continuous personal learning and development, notwithstanding what you get from your company. Build on top of that. And if you're a sales manager, I'd urge you to make the commitment to coach your salespeople on a regular basis, preferably multiple times a week. If you can put these principles into practice, you'll be well on your way to getting the most out of outcome-centric selling. Now, some final thoughts. I think it's really important you always strive to maintain an intelligent balance between planning and implementation. Planning clearly matters. Planning and preparation helps to prevent poor performance, but practice also matters. The more you practice, the better you get. But it's like being a sports person, and that's particularly true when it comes to new ideas or new skills. Evidence matters. You must always seek out the evidence to support your decisions. And learning matters. Everything you do presents you with an opportunity to learn and improve. Take advantage of it. And adaptability matters. No matter how much planning you've done, you must always adapt and respond to the situation in real time as it appears in front of you. And in fact, Dwight Eisenhower said, "Plans are nothing, but planning is everything." And I think one of the reasons he said that is because in any complex environment, no plan, no matter how well researched, ever survives completely unscathed or unchanged when it's confronted by reality. But the discipline of planning and preparing not only enables you to deal with the expected, it also prepares you to respond more effectively to the unpredictable and the unexpected. So there we have it. I hope that you found that summary useful and that you're already putting many of those principles into practice. And I wish you the very best of success in doing that. Now, our next module in this final course on mastering the outcome-centric selling approach focuses on using the outcome-centric selling toolkit to best advantage. And I hope you'll want to join me for that module in the very near future.